The concept of ghosts, poltergeists, or some other unknown entities have always intrigued us. In the past, we have presented few videos on this topic. If you are interested in scary nights, be sure to check those videos. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button and also press the bell icon to be a part of our notification squad. Today, we are looking at 5 real ghost stories. For this list, we will narrate the stories as presented by the people themselves. It's story time, folks. The Lady by the River. This one comes from Your Ghost Stories user RAVISHINGROXY. This happened to my great-grandmother sometime in the 1930s. Back then, it was a common practice among those who lived in the Indian villages to bathe at the village river. My great-grandmother was no different. She would rise at the crack of the dawn, usually signified by the crowing of the rooster, and then walk down to the village riverbank with her friends for a bath. One day it was business as usual for her. But as she left home to go to the riverbank, she saw her friends were not around. Assuming they were late, she continued on her way, though she did find it darker than usual. Once she reached the riverbank, she saw there was no one around except for one lady bathing in the river. She realized she was probably too early and decided to go back home. As she turned, the lady in the river called out to her and said that they were a little early, but since they were at the river, they might as well have a bath and others would be coming in soon. Soon, my great-grandmother struck up a conversation with her and asked what her name was and how long she had been there in the river. The lady replied with her name and said she entered the river a few minutes after she saw my great-grandmother walking down towards it. My great-grandmother was surprised as she hadn't seen anyone on her way to the river, but casually dismissing the thought, she asked the lady where she stayed. And that's when she pointed out to one of the trees at the riverbank and laughed and started floating above the water. My great-grandmother just gathered all her stuff from the bank and ran away, praying, never looking back. By the time she was back home, everyone was up looking for her. It was only then that they realized she was out at around 2 or 3 a.m. instead of the usual 4:30 a.m. that she used to go out. Ghost in our building. This one comes from Your Ghost Stories user RockySur05. I stay in Goa and, not wasting time, I will come to my story. Goa was ruled by Portuguese and got liberated in 1961. I live in a building which was built by my grandfather way back in 1950. This incident happened with my dad's sister way back in 1977. She was unmarried then and she had a habit of getting up in middle of the night to use washroom. One day she got up to use the washroom that was located outside the main building in those days, so she had to walk some distance. When she was returning, she saw one lady in the bushes with a small kerosene stove frying something in pure ghee. As smell was apparent, it felt like she was frying eggs on a tawa. She got shock of her life seeing this old lady in dark, but she could not make out her face. All of a sudden, this old lady appeared in front of her and she looked very scary. Seeing her, my aunt fainted. Later in the morning, she was spotted unconscious and had high fever. She recovered in a few days, but what she saw that night she never forgot. To date, when she comes home, she remembers this incident. She told her husband about this and he said she was mad, but my aunt believes that it was a spirit. Later, my granny cleared this, that it was a spirit of a worker woman who was involved in construction of that building and fell from the terrace and died at night. No one knows if it was a murder or a suicide or an accident. But one thing my granny stated was even more shocking. My granny said that the woman liked eggs very much and she would make sure that she ate eggs for breakfast, lunch and dinner. And that too she loved egg fried in pure ghee. So it must be the spirit of that lady wandering in the premises. A nightmare which came true. This comes from Your Ghost Stories user SCARLETMYSTIQUE. I often used to visit my grandparents in summer vacations with my parents when I was a little kid. I was always very adamant on being on my own as it made me feel like a big girl. So, on one instance, my parents decided to leave me alone with my grandparents for a week, which was a very big deal for me as they were always around wherever I was. My grandparents lived in a large 3-story mansion. There was only one room on the first floor and the second floor was terrace. Although I was glad to have freedom and independence, sometimes the house was too silent and I couldn't miss any sound, no matter how soft or low. I would hear unfamiliar footsteps from the room on first floor. Sometimes they came from my mom's room, which I had for myself while I stayed. I asked my grandmother once if she could hear the footsteps, and she just shook her head. "Did your mother tell you the story of footsteps?" she asked me, which was odd because she hadn't. I didn't say anything, but my grandmother continued. "She always used to complain about someone else in the house, but I have never heard or seen anything." 2 days later, I was sleeping in my mom's bedroom and I had this nightmare that while I slept on the bed, a long dark figure stood over me just watching me. It had no eyes, but its head was bent towards my direction. It kept looking at me for a long while, but then all of a sudden it reached out to grab my wrist. I was so terrified I woke up all sweaty, even though there was plenty air conditioning in the room. I reached out for the lights immediately, but as I switched them on, my wrist pained as if it had been heavily sprained. I gasped at the pain and looked at my hand. There was big red band all over the wrist, like all the muscles along the circumference of my hand had been pulled. I didn't even bother switching the lights off. I just ran to my grandmother's room and crawled up in her bed. Next morning, my hand was fine. I didn't say anything to my grandmother or grandfather, but I ensured they were around me all the time and slept with them through the rest of the week. Nothing happened again. Someone on the doorway. This comes from the Reddit user Bree_2455. When I was 7 years old, I moved into a house in the middle of a school year. The house was one story with no attic or basement. My room was next to my brother's room and our parents' room was connected to a bathroom in the hall where our rooms were. I loved the house, but while we lived there, I witnessed something abnormal. One night, just as I was about to go to sleep, I see something at the doorway of my room. So I asked if it was my dad, but it didn't answer, so I squinted my eyes and see it more clearly. It was a man with a wolf head, striped red shirt and in overalls. I get scared and turn away, covering my face under the blanket and went to sleep. I thought it was just a dream, but it happened every night. So I told my parents about it. They believed me and my dad tried blessing the house, but the wolf man was still coming to my room every night. One Halloween, I had a Halloween party, but after 9 o'clock, nearly everyone left. My brother and his friend stayed over the night. They decided to stay up and play some games while I went to sleep. The next morning, after my brother's friend left, my brother told me he saw the wolf man too, plus an Indian woman in his room. After a couple more months, my mom decided to search the history of the house on the internet and found it was an Indian burial ground, so the spirits of them would haunt the house. Sooner than later, we moved out since the owner wanted the house back. That was my experience with the ghost. Dancing down an Indian hallway in darkness. This story comes from the Reddit user Voodoo Mukau. My cousin recently moved here from Sikandrabad, India. On a recent road trip exploring America, we were exchanging ghost stories. I asked her if she's ever experienced anything supernatural. Her eyes widened as she averted her eyes to the window. Just when the silence was about to be too much for me, she softly responded, "Yes, a few. One is troubling. When I was a second year in college, I stayed at an all-girl hostel. I made many friends. We were all very happy to be in school away from our conservative parents. The hostel was so much fun, but it was a very old building. Electricity was only put in the rooms. Sometimes candles were placed along the windows if a watchman was present, but normally once you left the rooms, you were faced with complete darkness. It's common to wake up someone if you needed to walk down to the restroom at the end of the hall. One night I had to use the restroom. It was about 4 a.m. I went to my friend's bed and tapped her on the arm. She immediately opened her eyes as soon as I touched her. I apologized for bothering her and told her I needed to pee. She smiled at me and hopped out of the bed. All the way down the hallway, she laughed and danced. I could not see her at all, but her bangles clanked together loudly and the bells on her anklets jingled softly. It was very calming. I laughed and sashayed my hips down the hallway with her, too tired to match elaborate arm movements. She said nothing to me, though occasionally I heard her hum one of her favorite Bollywood songs. The same thing happened on our return. I fell back asleep easily. I awoke fairly late the next morning to the sound of men in our room. They surrounded her bed. I bolted from my bed, prepared to protect my friend, when I realized they were administrators of the college. I peered over closer. My friend's lifeless eyes were fixated on my bed. The same smile on her face. Suicide. Her time of death was 11:30 p.m., almost 5 hours before I woke her. Did you like these real ghost stories? Comment down to tell us about your experiences. Also, watch these other videos from Top 5s Indeed. And be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to never miss an update.